The air inside the Sterling and Sons private bank was filtered to a surgical chill, smelling of expensive mahogany polish and the cold, metallic scent of high-frequency trading servers. I had spent 8 years in this building, climbing from the analyst pits to the senior vice presidency of wealth management. I didn't just know the numbers, I knew the skeletons in every offshore vault. But today, the eyes of the mahogany-paneled corridor were averted. The silence was the first sign of the execution. "Sit down, Elizabeth," my uncle, Arthur Sterling, said without looking up from a digital ledger. He was the chairman, a man whose soul was as dry as the parchment he worshipped. Beside him sat my cousins, Julian and Marcus, 2 men who had inherited everything and earned nothing. "The board has completed its quarterly review," Arthur continued, his voice as flat as a dial tone. "We've found significant irregularities in your department's risk assessment, a loss of $40 million in the emerging markets portfolio. It's a mark of incompetence we cannot ignore." Incompetence? I felt a sharp, cold laugh bubble in my throat. "Arthur, I flagged those risks 6 months ago. You and Marcus overrode my veto because the commission structure was too tempting. I have the paper trail to prove it." "The paper trail has been archived," Marcus interrupted, his smirk widening. "As of 10 minutes ago, your security clearance is revoked, your corporate accounts are frozen, and since your contract includes a morality clause regarding professional negligence, there will be no severance package. You are leaving Sterling & Sons with exactly what you brought into it, nothing." "You're firing me for your own greed?" I stood up, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a death knell. "I built the Asian desk from scratch. I doubled the private equity returns. This isn't about performance, Arthur. It's about the fact that I refused to sign off on the shell company merger last week." "It's about family, Elizabeth," Arthur said, finally looking up. His eyes were like gray stones. "And you've forgotten that in this house, the blood that counts is the blood that stays quiet. Security will escort you to the curb. Don't bother coming back for your personal effects. They will be couriered to your apartment in a cardboard box." The rain was a thin, freezing mist that soaked through my silk blouse in seconds. I stood on Wall Street, surrounded by thousands of people rushing toward their own versions of success, feeling the sudden, violent weight of being a ghost. I had no job, no access to my savings, and a name that was now blacklisted across every prime brokerage in the city. But they made one mistake. They thought my power came from the title they gave me. They forgot that my father, the black sheep brother who died when I was 10, was the one who actually designed the bank's original trust structures before Arthur pushed him out. I walked 20 blocks in the rain to a small, dusty law firm in Queens. It was the office of Barnaby Finch, a man who looked like he had been preserved in mothballs since 1974. He had been my father's only true friend and the keeper of the Sterling archives that Arthur thought had been burned in the 90s. "I knew they'd do it eventually, Lizzie," Barnaby wheezed, pulling a heavy, rusted metal box from a shelf hidden behind a stack of tax codes. "Arthur was always a shark who thought he was a whale. He thinks he owns the ocean, but he doesn't realize the tide is dictated by the moon." Inside the box was a single handwritten document on vellum signed in 1995. It was the Founding Beneficiary Trust, FBT09. As I read the clauses, the cold in my bones began to turn into a white-hot fire. My father hadn't just left me memories, he had left me a trap door. "The birthright clause?" I whispered, tracing the ink. "Your father knew Arthur would try to consolidate power," Barnaby said, tapping a nicotine-stained finger on the document. "This trust was funded by your grandfather's original private bullion. It wasn't part of the corporate shares. It was a silent equity stake held in a dormant custody account. It represents 30% of the bank's actual liquidity. According to this, on your 30th birthday, which was last Tuesday, the voting rights of this capital transfer to you personally." 30%? I breathed. Arthur and the cousins only hold 24% combined. The rest is institutional investors who are currently terrified of the market volatility. "You don't just have a seat at the table, Elizabeth," Barnaby smiled, revealing a crooked row of teeth. "You are the table. If you invoke this today, you can trigger an emergency shareholder meeting. You can challenge the board. You can burn the golden cage to the ground." I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of Barnaby's office. The woman who walked out of the bank an hour ago was dead. The woman standing here now was a sterling who had finally learned how to count. "Barnaby, draft the NOI activation," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "We're going to file it with the Federal Reserve and the SEC simultaneously. I want the board to receive the notification at exactly 9 a.m. tomorrow, just as they open the trading floor." "What's the plan, Lizzie? You want your job back?" "No," I said, looking at the distant skyline of Manhattan. "I want the keys to the vault, and then I'm going to change the locks." I spent the night in a cheap motel, fueled by black coffee and the digital archives Barnaby had kept. I mapped out every weakness in Arthur's current strategy. I saw the hidden debt, the failing mergers, and the predatory loans they were using to stay afloat. They weren't just greedy, they were desperate, and they had just fired the only person who knew how to fix it. As the sun began to rise over the East River, I put on the only clean suit I had left, a sharp midnight blue armor. I wasn't going back to Sterling & Sons as a niece. I was going back as the reckoning.
My dear ones, thank you for listening to this story. It makes me incredibly happy to feel that you are here with me. I try my best for you and post new videos every day, putting a piece of myself into them. If my stories resonate with you, your subscription and viewing of other videos will be the warmest support for me and inspiration to continue telling stories.
The bronze and glass monolith of the Sterling building stood tall against the Manhattan sky, its facade shimmering like an unshakable fortress. At 8:55 a.m., the lobby was a cathedral of hushed voices and expensive cologne. I walked toward the security desk, my heart thumping a steady, rhythmic beat of war. The guard, a man named Henderson who had tipped his hat to me for 8 years, looked up with a mixture of pity and confusion. "I'm sorry, Miss Sterling," he said, his voice low. "The instructions are very clear. Your access has been permanently terminated. I'm going to have to ask you to—" "Read the screen, Henderson," I said, sliding a digital tablet across the marble counter, "and check the internal legal bulletin from the SEC. There's a mandatory injunction on my credentials. I am no longer an employee of Sterling & Sons. I am a principal shareholder attending an emergency meeting under the bylaws of the 1995 founding charter." Henderson blinked, his eyes darting to his monitor. His jaw dropped as a red Level 1 access, verified, flashed across his screen, overriding the previous blacklisting. I didn't wait for him to apologize. I stepped into the private elevator, the one reserved for the board, and pressed the button for the 50th floor. The boardroom doors were massive slabs of African mahogany, guarded by 2 more suits who looked like they'd been carved from the same wood. As I approached, I could hear Arthur's voice, booming, confident, and utterly predatory. "And with the Atlas Gray merger, we not only stabilize our liquidity, but permanently remove the toxic influence that led to our recent internal failures," Arthur was saying. A murmur of agreement followed. I didn't knock. I pushed. The doors swung open with a heavy, deliberate thud that cut the chairman's sentence in midair. Every head at the table turned. Julian dropped his pen. Marcus turned a shade of sickly yellow. Arthur, standing at the head of the table with a gavel in his hand, looked as if he'd just seen a ghost who had forgotten how to haunt and learned how to kill. "Elizabeth," Arthur hissed, his grip tightening on the gavel. "You are trespassing on private property. I'll have you arrested before you can reach your seat." "Sit down, Arthur," I said, walking to the empty chair at the far end of the table, the one that had belonged to my father. "I'm not here for an exit interview. I'm here to exercise my voting rights under Trust FBT-09. Since the SEC verified my standing 10 minutes ago, any vote taken in this room without my participation is a felony. Shall we discuss the agenda, or should I call the federal marshal waiting in the lobby?" The room dissolved in a frantic whisper of lawyers and frantic phone calls. Marcus, ever the coward, leaned forward, his voice trembling with rage. "That's impossible. Trust FBT-09 was dissolved in the restructuring of '98. You're bluffing with a dead man's signature." "The restructuring only affected the corporate equity, Marcus," I said, sliding a copy of the original vellum document down the table. "My father was smarter than you. He knew you'd try to dilute his branch of the family. He placed 30% of the bank's initial bullion reserve into a dormant custody account. That gold wasn't part of the bank's stock. It was the bank's foundation. And as of my 30th birthday, that gold converts into 30% of the voting shares of the holding company." Arthur snatched the paper, his eyes scanning the clauses like a man looking for an exit in a burning building. His hand shook. He knew this ink. He knew the birthright clause was the one thing he couldn't litigate away. "This is a technicality," Arthur managed to say, his voice losing his thunder. "Even with 30%, you are a minority. The board and the family still hold the majority. We are moving forward with the Atlas Gray vote." "Are you?" I smiled, and it felt like a blade. "Because I've spent the last 12 hours talking to the institutional investors, Vanguard, BlackRock, and the pension funds. They're not happy, Arthur. They heard about the $40 million irregularity. They also heard that Atlas Gray is a shell company registered in the Caymans, owned by a cousin of yours on your mother's side." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the distant siren of a police car 40 floors below. "I'm moving for an immediate dissolution of the current board," I announced, my voice clear and cold. "And I'm calling for a forensic audit of the Sterling-Atlas relationship. If the board votes against me, the institutional investors have authorized me to act as their proxy. Combined, we hold 52%. Arthur, you're not just out of time, you're out of a job." "You're destroying the family name, Elizabeth," Julian shouted, standing up. "If this gets out, the bank's stock will crater. We'll all be broke." "The bank is already broken, Julian," I said, looking him in the eye. "You and Marcus have been treating the vault like a personal piggy bank for years. I'm not destroying the name, I'm reclaiming it from the thieves who stole it." "I'll fight you," Arthur whispered, his eyes red. "I'll tie you up in court for a decade. You won't see a cent of that gold." "I don't need the gold, Arthur," I said, leaning over the table. "I have the ledger for the account 99 transactions, the ones you used to fund your gambling debts in Macau. If I release that to the SEC, you won't be going to court, you'll be going to a federal penitentiary." The air in the room shifted. The other board members, men who had spent years nodding to Arthur's commands, suddenly realized the wind had changed. One by one, they began to slide their tablets toward me. They were rats, and the ship was sinking. I need a moment to confer with my counsel," Arthur stammered, his bravado completely evaporated. "You have 5 minutes," I said, checking my watch. "At 9:30 a.m., the trading floor opens. If you haven't resigned by then, I press send on the whistleblower file. The choice is yours, Uncle. A quiet retirement in the Hamptons or a very loud trial in Manhattan." I walked out of the boardroom and into the executive lounge. My hands were finally shaking, but not from fear, from the sheer, unadulterated weight of justice. I looked out the window at the Statue of Liberty in the distance. My father had been silenced for years, but today his voice was the loudest thing in the building. But as I waited for the clock to tick down, Barnaby Finch's voice crackled through my earpiece. Lizzie, we have a problem. The account 99 ledger, it's been accessed in the last 5 minutes from an external IP. Someone is wiping the server from a remote location. Arthur wasn't the only one with the keys. There's a silent partner, someone much higher up the food chain than your uncle. I froze. I had the family in a corner, but I had just realized that the Sterling Bank was only a small room in a much larger, darker house.
The silence in the boardroom was no longer triumphant. It was clinical, like the air in a morgue. Arthur sat slumped in his leather chair, his expensive silk tie loosened, looking at the city below as if he were already seeing it from behind bars. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the small, red deletion in progress bar flickering on my laptop screen. The digital soul of the bank's corruption was being bleached white in real time. "Barnaby, can you trace the IP?" I whispered into my earpiece, backing away from the table toward the heavy mahogany doors. "It's bouncing through 7 different proxy servers in Zurich, London, and Singapore, Lizzie." Barnaby's voice was frantic, the sound of rapid typing echoing in my ear. "This isn't your uncle. Arthur doesn't have the technical sophistication to trigger a 0-day wipe. Someone else has a back door into Sterling & Sons, a high-level architect, someone who's been using the bank as a laundromat for years." "Atlas Gray," I murmured. "It's not just a shell company. It's a front for a sovereign fund or a syndicate." I looked at Arthur. "Who is it, Uncle? Who's wiping the drive? If you tell me now, I can still protect you. If that data disappears, you're the only person left for the feds to blame." Arthur looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine pity in his eyes. "You think you've won, Elizabeth. You've just walked into a room full of monsters and turned on the lights. They don't care about the gold. They care about the silence. Run. If you have anything left of your fathers, take it and disappear. The Sterlings are already dead." The heavy doors of the boardroom burst open, but it wasn't security. It was 3 men in charcoal suits, completely anonymous, perfectly groomed, and radiating a quiet, professional violence. They didn't look like bankers. They looked like cleaners. "Ms. Sterling," the lead man said, his voice as smooth as a polished stone, "we are here from the compliance department of the International Settlement Bank. There has been a security breach. We need to secure all external devices and escort you to a safe location for debriefing." "I don't recall calling for a debriefing," I said, sliding the mechanical key, the heavy brass antique I'd taken from Barnaby's box, into my inner blazer pocket. "It wasn't a request," the man replied, stepping forward. I didn't wait. I didn't argue. I turned and sprinted toward the velvet balcony that overlooked the atrium. I knew this building better than they did. I knew that the executive lounge had a service lift that bypasses the main security hub, a remnant of the 1920s architecture that my father had insisted on keeping during the renovation. I dived through the velvet curtains of the lounge, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I heard the men behind me, their footsteps heavy and synchronized on the marble. I hit the service button on the brass-paneled lift and prayed to a god I hadn't spoken to in years. The lift groaned and began its slow descent. As the doors closed, I saw the lead cleaner reach the lounge, his hand reaching into his jacket. I didn't stay to see what he was pulling out. "Barnaby, they're in the building. Who are these people?" I'm looking. God, Lizzie, the Sterling Bank just had its credit rating re-evaluated to junk status in the last 60 seconds. Someone is shorting the stock into oblivion. It's a scorched earth policy. They're destroying the bank to bury the evidence. I have the key, Barnaby, the physical one from the 95 Trust. My father always said, "In a world of glass, keep a piece of iron." This is the key to a safe deposit box at the Bank of Winterthur in Zurich. He told me if the Sterlings ever went dark, the light would be in Switzerland.
Zurich? Lizzie, you're in downtown Manhattan, and the most powerful men in the world are trying to erase you from the census. You can't just hop on a plane. I emerged into the street, not through the grand revolving doors, but through a steam-filled alleyway used for laundry deliveries. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, turning the neon lights of the city into blurred smears of color. I looked like just another damp New Yorker, but I was carrying a secret that could collapse a dozen hedge funds. I didn't go to my apartment. I didn't go to the police. I went to the one place Arthur would never look, the basement of a 24-hour Ukrainian deli in Brighton Beach. It was owned by a man named Victor, someone my father had helped immigrate decades ago. "Elizabeth," Victor said, his face a map of scars and kindness. He didn't ask questions. He just handed me a burner phone and a bowl of hot borscht. "Your father said this day might come. He said, if my daughter arrives with the iron key, give her the passport and the coat." Inside the passport was a new identity, Elena Vane, and inside the coat pocket was a flight itinerary to Zurich via a private freight carrier. My father hadn't just left me a trust fund, he had built me an escape tunnel through time. I sat in the back of a delivery van, the smell of rye bread filling the air, watching the skyscrapers of Manhattan fade into the mist. I was 100% owner of a bank that was currently being liquidated and a target for a global syndicate I didn't even have a name for. I looked at the iron key in my palm. It was cold and heavy. Arthur thought the war was over because he had signed a piece of paper, but the Sterlings were more than just a name on a building. We were the keepers of the dross, the people who knew where the gold was buried and who had bled to put it there. "Barnaby," I said into the burner phone, "I'm heading to the airport. I need you to go to the New York Times. Don't give them the ledger, that's gone. Give them the names of the board members who were present at the Atlas Gray vote. Tell them to follow the trail to the Cayman shell companies. Give the monsters a face to hide behind while I find the heart of the machine. Lizzie, be careful. If you open that box in Zurich, there's no going back. You'll know things that make people disappear permanently." "They already tried to make me disappear," I said, my voice as cold as the rain outside. "Now I'm going to make sure they're remembered, for the wrong reasons." The van bumped along the highway, heading toward the private airfield. I closed my eyes and saw my father's face. He hadn't been a black sheep because he was weak. He had been a whistleblower who ran out of time. Today, I was going to finish his clock. The Bank of Winterthur sat on the parade plots like a silent, gray predator made of granite and history. There were no neon signs here, no digital tickers. Only the heavy, brass-studded doors and the watchful eyes of guards who looked like they were born in tailored wool suits. I walked through the lobby, my boots clicking on the hallowed stone floor, feeling the weight of the Elena Vane passport in my pocket. I was a ghost visiting a tomb. "I am here for Vault Sector 0, I said to the clerk, sliding the iron key across the green felt of the counter. The man didn't blink, but his pupils dilated as he saw the intricate carvings on the bow of the key, a stylized sterling silver phoenix, the private mark of my father. "Sector 0 has not been accessed in 31 years, Madam Vane," the clerk whispered, his voice as dry as old parchment. "It requires a biometric verification that matches the original depositor's lineage. Please, follow me." We descended deeper than any subway, past the modern laser grids and into the iron level, where the air smelled of wet stone and ancient grease. The clerk stopped in front of a massive circular door that looked like it belonged to a Victorian submarine. There was no keypad, only a keyhole and a small glass-covered plate for a handprint. I placed my hand on the cold glass. A thin blue line of light scanned my palm, tracing the map of the Sterling bloodline. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then a series of heavy mechanical thuds echoed through the vault. The tumblers were shifting. The iron was speaking. "Access granted, Miss Sterling," the clerk said, stepping back into the shadows. "You have 60 minutes before the security seals re-engage." Inside, the box wasn't a mountain of gold or a stack of bearer bonds. There was only a single leather-bound ledger, the Black Book, and a small silver digital recorder from the early 90s. I hit the play button. The voice that emerged was raspy, tired, but unmistakably my father's. "Elizabeth, if you are hearing this, then the Sterling Bank has finally become a hollow shell. I tried to stop them, Elizzy. I tried to show the board that Atlas Gray wasn't just an offshore partner. It was the infrastructure for a global shadow state. They don't just launder money, they launder influence. They buy politicians, they fund coups, and they use the Sterling name as a shield of respectability. I've recorded the true owners here, the apostles of Gray. If you use this, you will be declared an enemy of the world, but if you don't, you will be a slave to it." I opened the ledger. The names weren't just bankers. They were ministers of finance, heads of intelligence agencies, and CEOs of tech giants. It was a map of a hidden world where Sterling and Sons was merely the treasury. Atlas Gray was the puppeteer, and the apostles were the strings. Suddenly, my burner phone buzzed. It was Barnaby. "Lizzie, get out of there, now! The Zurich police just received an Interpol red notice for Elena Vane. They're claiming you're a high-level money launderer for a terrorist organization. The Swiss authorities are 10 minutes from the parade plots. They're not coming to arrest you. They're coming to secure the ledger." "They're already here, Barnaby." I looked at the security monitor in the corner of the room. The elevator was descending. I saw the same charcoal-suited cleaners from York. They hadn't just followed me. They had been waiting for me to unlock the door for them. I looked around the small room. There was no other exit, no secret tunnels, just the iron walls and the ticking clock of the security seal. But then I noticed a small grate near the floor, a ventilation shaft for the old pneumatic tube system the bank used to use in the 1950s. "Barnaby, can you access the bank's old pneumatic control system, the one they used for physical memos?" "The whistle tubes? Lizzie, those have been dead for decades. But wait, if the compressors are still on for the vault's air circulation, I might be able to reverse the pressure. Why? Because I'm not leaving with the ledger. I'm sending it to you." I shoved the Black Book into the canister and slammed it into the tube. I heard the hiss of air. The canister vanished into the ceiling with a violent thwump. "Got it, Lizzie. It's headed to the basement of a library 3 blocks away. But what about you?" "I'm going to give them exactly what they want. Elena Vane." The vault door began to move. I took the digital recorder and smashed it against the floor, then threw the iron key into the dark corner. I sat on the stool, smoothed my hair, and waited. When the door swung open, the lead cleaner stepped in, his silenced pistol aimed directly at my chest. "The ledger, Miss Sterling," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Hand it over, and we can discuss the terms of your disappearance." "You're too late," I said, showing him my empty hands. "The truth is already in the air, and you can't shoot the air, can you?" He didn't fire. He looked at the empty shelves, then at the pneumatic tube. He realized he had been outplayed by technology from the 50s. He grabbed me by the arm and dragged me toward the elevator. But as we reached the lobby, the sound of sirens filled the square. The Zurich police weren't there for me. They were there because Barnaby had triggered a silent alarm in the gold reserve sector, a distraction that forced the local authorities to swarm the building. In the chaos of the police raid, I felt a hand grab my collar and pull me into a side corridor. It was Sophia, a woman I had met once at a banking conference in Davos, a high-level operative for the European Central Bank's anti-money laundering unit. "If you want to live, Elizabeth, you'll come with me," Sophia whispered, flashing a badge. "We've been watching Atlas Gray for 5 years. We needed someone to open that vault. You just did. Now the real war begins."
My dear ones, thank you for listening to this story. It makes me incredibly happy to feel that you are here with me. I try my best for you and post new videos every day, putting a piece of myself into them. If my stories resonate with you, your subscription and viewing of other videos will be the warmest support for me and inspiration to continue telling stories.
The Thames looked like a river of liquid lead under the flickering lights of the embankment. I stood on a private balcony in Chelsea, wrapped in a dress that cost more than my first apartment, a masterpiece of midnight black silk and hidden microtransmitters. Sophia stood behind me, adjusting the sapphire necklace that doubled as a high-frequency recorder. "You remember the protocol, Elizabeth," Sophia said, her voice sharp as a diamond. "You are no longer the victim. You are the pragmatist. You've realized that the Sterling Bank is dead, and you want to trade the Zurich secrets for a seat on the Atlas Gray Executive Committee. They'll be suspicious, but their greed will outweigh their caution. They want that ledger, and they think you're desperate enough to hand it over." "I am desperate, Sophia," I said, looking at my reflection. I looked like a queen, but I felt like a sacrificial lamb. But not for money. I want to know who gave the order to wipe the servers in New York. I want to know who killed my father's reputation before they killed him. "The man you're looking for is Lord Alistair Vane, the head of the Apostles. He doesn't exist in public records, but he owns 30% of the City of London's commercial real estate. He is the architect of the shadow state. If he believes you, he'll take you to the inner sanctum." The Guildhall was a cathedral of excess. Gold leaf ceilings, crystal chandeliers the size of small cars, and hundreds of men in tuxedos talking about liquidity and collateral while people in the real world struggled to pay for bread. I walked through the crowd, feeling the eyes of the global elite on me. They knew the name Sterling. They knew the scandal. They thought I was a fallen star looking for a place to crash. I spotted Julian and Marcus in a corner, looking miserable in their tailored suits. They had been reduced to junior analysts under the new Athelgard management that had swallowed the bank's remains. When they saw me, Julian nearly choked on his champagne. "Elizabeth, you have some nerve showing up here," Julian hissed, stepping into my path. "The authorities are looking for you. You're a fugitive." "The authorities are looking for the truth, Julian, something you wouldn't recognize if it hit you in the face," I said, gliding past him toward the VIP lounge. "Tell Arthur I said hello if he's finished crying in his penthouse." At the end of the hall, behind 2 massive guards with earpieces, sat Lord Alistair Vane. He was younger than I expected, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to perceive the world in pure mathematical probabilities. He didn't stand when I approached. He simply sipped a glass of clear liquid and watched me. "The girl with the iron key," Vane said, his voice a melodic, terrifying baritone.
I was told you were at the bottom of the Limit River in Zurich. It seems rumors of your demise were as exaggerated as your family's honesty. I'm a sterling, Lord Vane, I said, sitting down opposite him without an invitation. We don't die easily. We just wait for the interest to accrue. And what brings a ghost to my table? Are you seeking an exorcism or a partnership? I'm seeking a trade, I said, leaning forward. I know the Swiss vault was empty when your men arrived. I also know that Barnaby Finch hasn't released the black book yet. I've put a dead man's switch on the data. If I don't check in every 12 hours, the names of every apostle go to the global press. But if you give me back the sterling assets and a seat on your Atlas Gray board, I'll hand over the decryption keys. I'd rather be a billionaire in the shadow state than a martyr in a prison cell. Vane studied me for a long time. I could feel the transmitter against my skin, humming with the weight of our conversation. This was the moment. If he believed me, I was in. If he didn't, I wouldn't make it to the cloakroom. You have your father's eyes, Elizabeth, Vane said softly, but you have your uncle's ambition. I like that. The world is built by people who understand that truth is just a variable in a larger equation, but there's someone here who wants to verify your sincerity. Vane gestured to the shadows behind him. A man stepped forward, his face partially obscured by the low light. My heart stopped. The air seemed to leave the room. Lizzie, the man said. It was a voice I hadn't heard 20 years, a voice that had tucked me in at night and taught me how to read a balance sheet. Dad? I whispered, my world tilting on its axis. My father, Thomas Sterling, wasn't a ghost. He was standing there, dressed in the same expensive silk as the men who had tried to destroy me. He didn't look like a prisoner. He looked like an apostle. You're alive, I said, the words tasting like ash. The Zurich tapes, the warning, it was all a lie. It was a test, Elizabeth, Thomas said, his face devoid of the warmth I remembered. The Black Book isn't a list of enemies, it's a list of members. I needed to know if you had the instinct to find it. I needed to know if you were a sterling of the blood or just another weak link. You found the key. You found the vault. You even outsmarted Vane's cleaners. You've passed, Lizzie. Welcome to the family business. I looked at the sapphire necklace. Sophia was listening. The ECB was listening. But the man I had spent my life trying to honor was the one who had built the very monster I was trying to slay. He hadn't been pushed out by Arthur. He had ascended past him. You killed my mother, I said, my voice shaking with a fury I couldn't contain. She died thinking you were a failure. I spent my life in poverty because you died to join this cult? Your mother was a casualty of the transition, Elizabeth. Some things are larger than a single life, Thomas said, stepping in to polite. We control the flow of the world. We are the architects of the new order. Do you want to be a part of it, or do you want to be the girl who cried justice to a world that doesn't care? I reached for the necklace, my fingers hovering over the emergency button. If I pressed it, Sophia's team would storm the building, but I would never get the truth. I would never know how deep the rot went. I want to be the one who finishes the job, I said, my voice suddenly as cold as the Thames. Give me the keys to the Atlas Gray server. I want to see the Account 99 transactions from the beginning. I want to see the blood on the money. Thomas smiled, a hollow, terrifying expression. Spoken like a true sterling. Lord Vane, give her the credentials. Let's see if our new apostle can handle the weight of the crown.
The humidity of Singapore hit me like a physical wall as we stepped off the Gulf Stream. The city-state was a neon-lit labyrinth of glass and steel, a place where money moved faster than light, and shadows were bought and sold by the millisecond.
My father walked beside me, his stride confident, his hand occasionally resting on my shoulder with a terrifying, hollow affection. "You're quiet, Elizabeth," Thomas said as our armored limousine glided through the rain-slicked streets toward the financial district. "Is the reality of power too heavy for you, or are you still mourning the fairy tale of the honest father?" "I'm adjusting the variables, Dad," I said, staring at the reflection of the super trees in the window. "I'm realizing that the only difference between a banker and a king is the size of the vault. I just want to make sure my seat at the table is permanent." "It is," he replied, his eyes reflecting the red neon of the city. "Tomorrow, you will lead the final integration of the Sterling assets into the Atlas cloud. Once the merger is complete, the old bank is gone. The legacy becomes global. We won't just hold the gold, we will be the gold." Sophia was in my ear, a faint static hum from a subdermal transmitter. "Elizabeth, the server room in Marina 1 is biometric locked. Only Thomas and Vane have the clearance. You have to get his physical keycard and a retinal scan. We've given you a contact lens that can capture a high-res image of his iris. You just need to get close enough." "Close enough to the man who shared my DNA?" I whispered into my collar when my father stepped out to take a call from the Prime Minister. "He's been watching me since I was a child. He knows my tells, Sophia." "Then stop being his daughter," Sophia's voice was cold. "Be a Sterling. Be the woman who fired her own uncle. He respects power, Elizabeth. Show him yours." The Marina 1 tower was a fortress of silent technology. We descended into the cryo vault, a room cooled to near freezing temperatures to protect the quantum processors of the Atlas Gray network. This was the heart of the machine. Every bribe, every shadow loan, every manipulated election was recorded here. "This is the Account 99 source code," Thomas said, gesturing to a pulsating blue terminal. "It's a self-correcting algorithm. It identifies market weaknesses before they happen and creates liquidity events to exploit them. It's what allowed us to survive the collapse of '98 and '08. It's the ultimate predator." "It's beautiful," I said, stepping closer to the console. I felt the cold air biting at my skin. "But it has a flaw. It's centralized. If someone strikes the core, the whole network bleeds." "That's why we have the Apostle Protocol," Vane said, stepping out of the shadows. "The network can only be accessed by two of us simultaneously, a failsafe against betrayal." My father stepped toward the terminal, his hand hovering over the biometric pad. "Ready, Elizabeth? Today you sign the digital charter. You become the third key." This was it. I needed to capture his iris and switch the USB drive in the console with the Prometheus worm Sophia had given me. My heart was a drum, vibrating in my chest. I stepped beside my father, leaning in as if to look at the code. "Dad," I whispered, looking directly into his eyes, "tell me one thing. Did you ever really love her, or was Mom just a variable too?" For a fraction of a second, Thomas Sterling flinched, his pupils dilated, the perfect window for the contact lens to map his retina. "She was the only thing I ever regretted losing, Lizzie, but some prices have to be paid. Then consider this the final installment." I slammed the USB into the port. The screen flickered. The blue light of the vault turned a violent, warning red. "Intrusion detected," Vane shouted, reaching for his sidearm. "What have you done, Elizabeth?" "I've initiated a total liquidation," I said, backing away as the servers began to scream. "Every shadow account, every apostle ledger is currently being uploaded to the ECB, the FBI, and every major news outlet in the world. The Atlas is falling, Lord Vane, and you're the ones underneath it." Thomas didn't pull a gun. He just looked at the screen, then at me. There was no anger in his face, only a profound, terrifying disappointment. You think you can stop the tide, Elizabeth? You've just triggered the scorched earth protocol. The system is deleting the global bank ledgers. You're not just exposing us, you're crashing the entire global economy tonight. Millions of people will lose their savings because of your justice. The scorched earth was your failsafe, not mine, I yelled over the roar of the cooling fans. You'd rather destroy the world than lose your control over it. That's the Sterling way, Lizzie. If we don't own the game, nobody gets to play. You've just become the greatest villain in history. Suddenly, the doors of the vault were blown open, not by Sophia's team, but by an explosion. Smoke filled the room. I felt a hand grab my arm and pull me into the haze. It was Barnaby. He looked 30 years younger, wearing tactical gear and carrying a submachine gun. Lizzie, get out. The building is being targeted by a drone strike. Vane's partners are cleaning house. They're erasing the tower and everyone in it. What about my father? I screamed, looking back into the red glow. I saw Thomas Sterling standing by the terminal, his hand on the core. He wasn't trying to escape. He was typing. Go, Elizabeth, he shouted through the roar. I'm rerouting the deletion. I can't stop the leak, but I'm saving the people's deposits. I'm giving them the Sterling head, but I'm saving the body. Run! The building shook. The ceiling began to collapse. I was dragged into the service elevator just as the floor above us erupted in a fireball. The apostles were being purged by their own masters.
The Victoria Harbor was a chaotic mirror of neon lights and dark water as our hydrofoil cut through the waves. Hong Kong felt like a city on the edge of a nervous breakdown. Global markets were already spiraling. The Singapore leak had sent the yen and the dollar into a tailspin. People didn't know it yet, but the foundation of their digital lives was being eroded from a sub-level bunker beneath the peak. Lizzie, look at the screen, Barnaby said, his face illuminated by the green glow of a tactical tablet. He wasn't the dusty lawyer from Queens anymore. He was the man my father had trained to be a failsafe. Vane is utilizing a God key, a backdoor built into the global SWIFT system by the apostles decades ago. He's draining the dormant accounts first, but in 4 hours he'll hit the commercial reserves. It's a $40 trillion heist. And the only way to stop it is to be physically present at the Hong Kong exchange hub, I said, checking the slide on the pistol Sophia had handed me before we split up. I hated the weight of it, but I hated the thought of Vane winning even more. He knows we're coming. He knows I have the final sequence my father typed before the explosion. Your father didn't just save the deposits, Lizzie, Barnaby whispered. He gave you the Omega link, the kill code for the Omega, but it's a suicide command for the Sterling name. If you use it, the bank, the family history, and every cent associated with the Sterling bloodline vanishes forever. You'll be a woman without a past. We hit the docks running. The city was a labyrinth of verticality, and the target was the Jade Tower, a needle of glass that served as the primary data exchange for Asia. Vane had turned the upper floors into a digital fortress. Sophia's teams are tied up with the local triads Vane hired for protection, Barnaby said, as we bypassed the main elevators. We have to take the ventilation shafts, just like Zurich, only this time there are lasers and mercenaries instead of old stone walls. I climbed, my muscles screaming, my mind focused on the rhythmic code my father had whispered in my mind through the data stream. 3024990. The percentages of our fall, the numbers of our sins. We reached the 88th floor. The air was humming with the sound of 1 billion transactions per second. In the center of the circular room stood Lord Alistair Vane. He looked calm, almost bored as he watched the global wealth bars on the wall-sized monitors turn from green to gray.
Elizabeth, Vane said, without turning around, I must admire your persistence. Most people, after seeing their father vaporized, would take the hint and retire to a quiet island. But you have that stubborn, sterling arrogance. You truly believe you can save a world that is already sold. I'm not here to save the world, Vane, I said, stepping out of the shadows, my tablet ready. My father left me the Omega link. I know exactly how your God key works. It requires a sterling signature to finalize the transfer. You thought you could bypass it, but you can't. Vane finally turned, a thin smile on his lips. I don't need to bypass it, Elizabeth. I just need you to breathe on the scanner. And if you won't do it willingly, I have methods to ensure your cooperation that don't require your soul to be present. Barnaby, now, I shouted. The room went dark. Barnaby had triggered a localized EMP pulse, a desperate move that would fry our own electronics, but would give us 30 seconds of blindness. I didn't move toward Vane. I moved toward the central cooling pipe. In the darkness, the world became a symphony of shouts and muzzle flashes. I felt a bullet graze my shoulder, a hot sting of reality. I reached the pipe and slammed the tablet, shielded in lead, into the manual override port. Dad told me the secret of the Sterling Bank, Vane, I said into the blackness. It wasn't about the gold, it was about the debt, and I'm calling it all in. The power flickered back on. Vane was lunging for me, his face a mask of primal fury, but it was too late. The monitors weren't showing the theft anymore, they were showing a countdown. STRL-OMGA, initialized. Target, all Sterling-linked assets. Status, permanent purge. What have you done? Vane screamed, grabbing me by the throat. You've destroyed $40 trillion. You've wiped the ledger of the entire century. I've reset the clock, I gasped, looking at the screens as the names of the apostles vanished one by one, their wealth dissolving into the digital ether. The Sterlings are gone, Alistair, and so are you. The building began to shake as the cooling systems failed. The Omega code was a digital termite, eating the hardware from the inside out. Vane looked at the screens, realized his godhood was a pile of melting silicon, and let out a howl of desperation. Barnaby grabbed me, pulling me toward the emergency exit. Lizzie, we have to go. The server racks are going to explode. We dived into the stairwell just as the 88th floor turned into a furnace of burning data. As we descended, I felt the Elena Vane passport in my pocket. It was the only thing I had left. No bank, no name, no father. Just the weight of a world that would wake up tomorrow and find its chains slightly lighter even if it didn't know why.
My dear ones, thank you for listening to this story. It makes me incredibly happy to feel that you are here with me. I try my best for you and post new videos every day, putting a piece of myself into them. If my stories resonate with you, your subscription and viewing of other videos will be the warmest support for me and inspiration to continue telling stories.
The morning over Hong Kong was gray and indifferent. The world was in shock. News anchors across every continent were calling it the Great Reset. $40 trillion of shadow wealth had evaporated, and with it, the invisible chains of the Atlas Gray Syndicate. I sat in a small, nameless cafe in Kowloon, my shoulder bandaged, staring at a small obsidian black flash drive, the Zero account. He didn't want you to be a martyr, Elizabeth, Barnaby's voice came from the empty chair beside me. He looked older now, the adrenaline of the Jade Tower replaced by a weary peace. He knew that once the Omega code was triggered, there would be nothing left for you but the debris. This drive, it's the antidote to the Sterling poison. What is it, Barnaby? More passwords? More blood money?
It's a redistribution algorithm, Barnaby whispered. Your father spent 20 years skimming tiny fractions of a cent from every apostle transaction, not for himself, but for a fund he called the Foundation of the Dispossessed. It's enough to rebuild the small banks, the pension funds, and the family savings that Arthur and Vane tried to swallow. It's the only clean money left in the world. I looked at the drive. It was the weight of 1,000 lives. To activate it, I had to upload it to the global central bank network. But there was a catch. The moment the upload began, my location would be broadcast to every intelligence agency in the world. I would have exactly 3 minutes to finish the transfer before the cleaners or the feds closed in. If I do this, Elizabeth Sterling permanently dies, I said, looking at Barnaby. Elizabeth Sterling died in that vault in Zurich, Lizzie, he said, placing his hand over mine. Elena Vane is the one who gets to live. Your father gave his life so you could have a choice. This is it. I walked to the highest point of the Victoria Peak, where the public Wi-Fi was strong enough to hit the satellite relay. The city was waking up, unaware that its financial soul was about to be restored. I plugged the drive into my laptop and hit enter. Transfers initialized. Recipients 4,203,311 individual accounts. Source: the Sterling Legacy. The progress bar began to crawl. 10%, 20%. Suddenly my phone chirped, a private encrypted line. You really can't help yourself, can you, Elizabeth? It was Lord Vane's voice, hoarse, scarred, but still dripping with that aristocratic venom. You're giving it away. All that power, all that history, sacrificed for the sake of the little people? You're a disappointment to your DNA. I'm a Sterling, Alistair, I said, watching the bar hit 50%. We always settle our debts, and I'm paying yours too. I'm standing 300 yards behind you, Elizabeth, with a long-range rifle. If you don't cancel the transfer in the next 60 seconds, the Great Reset will include your brain on the pavement. I didn't turn around. I didn't flinch. I watched the bar hit 80%. Then shoot, Alistair. But you should know, the moment my heart rate stops, the apostle file I sent to the Times in Part 4 goes public without the redactations. You'll be the most hunted man in history before my body is cold. There was a long silence on the line. I could feel the cold wind of the peak biting at my neck. 90%, 95%. Checkmate, Lord Vane, I whispered. 100%, transfer complete, encryption keys destroyed, user Elizabeth Sterling deleted. The line went dead. I waited for the bullet, for the end, for the darkness, but it never came. Vane was a pragmatist. He knew that killing me now would only seal his own doom. He had vanished back into the shadows, a king without a kingdom. I closed the laptop and tossed it into the deep ravine below. I took the Elena Vane passport and a small envelope of cash Barnaby had provided. I walked down the mountain, merging with the crowd of tourists and commuters. I was no longer a banker. I was no longer a Sterling. I was just a woman in a gray coat, lost in the sea of humanity. 6 months later, I was sitting on a porch in a small coastal village in Portugal. The air smelled of salt and grilled sardines. My name was Elena, and I worked at the local library, helping children find books about adventures they would one day have. I opened a newspaper. On the front page was a small article. Mysterious windfall. Millions of small investors receive unexplained restitution from defunct Sterling estate. I smiled. For the first time in my life, the numbers balanced. A shadow fell over my table. A man sat down across from me. He looked tired, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. He pushed a small, dusty box towards me. "Barnaby?" I whispered. "Not exactly," he said, taking off the glasses. It wasn't Barnaby. It was the lead cleaner from New York, the man who had hunted me across 2 continents. But he wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a letter. "The apostles are gone, Elena, but the world still needs people who know how to read the dross. We're forming a new unit. No names, no boards, no vaults. Just the truth. Are you in?" I looked at the ocean, then at the letter. I thought about the golden cage I had escaped and the iron key I used to break it. "I have one condition," I said, leaning back. "We never, ever use the word sterling."